The clink of silverware against porcelain filled the air, a polished soundtrack to the French Quarter brunch my aunt had insisted on. Linen-draped tables crowded the room, waiters weaving between them with trays of champagne glasses and plates stacked with seasonal eggs. Benedict, my mother, Marjorie, raised her mimosa with deliberate slowness, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "You're lucky we even include you," she said, her voice light, almost playful, though her eyes never softened. My Aunt Lucille gave a thin laugh, swirling her drink before adding, "Let her feel important for a change." Across the table, my brother Dorian threw his head back with exaggerated amusement, his laugh echoing loud enough to draw glances from the next table. I kept my hand steady around the coffee cup, lifting it as though its weight alone tethered me to the moment. I smiled faintly, just enough to appear agreeable, and said nothing. Over the years, I had perfected silence as armor. To react was to be accused of being too sensitive. To speak up was to be told I was ruining the mood. The game was always the same sharp words from my mother, mockery from Dorian, Lucille watching like an audience member enjoying the show, and me, the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who existed in their eyes only when bills needed paying, tickets needed booking, or accounts needed fixing. I could almost hear the unspoken script, "Rachel will handle it. Rachel has it covered." Only my name wasn't Rachel. It was Callista. And yet even that identity felt borrowed, erased under the weight of their convenience. I sipped the lukewarm coffee, keeping my expression neutral, but something inside me shifted. Their laughter no longer stung, it calcified, and I knew this brunch would mark the beginning of something they would never see coming. The brunch ended as they always did, with my card left on the tray and no one offering to split the bill. I walked back through the quarter, past wrought iron balconies and street musicians, my mind drifting through the long catalog of times I had been expected to carry everyone else. It started small, back when I was 24 and just beginning my career. My mother called, flustered about booking a plane ticket to Baton Rouge for a reunion. "The internet confuses me," she had sighed. I had typed in her information, purchased the ticket with my own card, and promised myself she'd reimburse me. She never did. The next year, it became 2 tickets. By the third, she didn't even pretend anymore. Lucille was subtler, presenting her requests like favors I should feel honored to provide. "You're closer to the hotel websites, dear," she'd say. Asking me to reserve rooms for her trips to Houston, she promised to pay me back at check-in, but somehow the charges always lingered on my statements. I told myself it was easier not to argue. Then there was Dorian. His requests were louder, wrapped in urgency. One spring, he called asking to use my credit card for an anniversary trip. "I'll pay you back as soon as my bonus comes in," he insisted. The bonus never arrived. The balance stayed. He repeated the pattern enough times that I stopped expecting repayment. I became, in his words, the reliable one. Ironically, my job as a forensic accountant demanded precision, the ability to untangle other people's financial messes with patience and logic. I could trace fraud buried under layers of invoices, reconstruct hidden transactions from scraps of data. Yet when it came to my own family, I let chaos spill unchecked into my life, convincing myself that carrying their burdens would make me indispensable. But that brunch shifted something. For the first time, I began to see reliability not as a strength, but as the chain that kept me bound. And the weight of it was no longer something I wanted to bear as I thought of the lake house that symbolized everything unspoken between us. Whenever my family spoke of the cabin, they called it our house, as though the word itself wrapped us in some shared legacy. In truth, there was nothing collective about it. The deed bore one name mine, and it had since the summer of 2009, the year my father nearly lost it to foreclosure. His credit was wrecked from years of unpaid loans, and no one else in the family qualified to step in. I was 21, fresh out of school, with the only clean record. I signed the papers to keep the cabin standing. My father shook my hand and muttered a distracted good, as though I'd simply taken out the trash. Since then, every expense, property taxes, storm repairs, winter heating, even the insurance premiums had flowed out of my account like a second rent. I tracked the invoices in neat folders, each one stamped with my name as guarantor. Not once did anyone offer to contribute. When the bills came, they turned silent. But when summer arrived, they descended on Caddo Lake like it was a public resort. I remember walking in after one of their weekend's beer bottles scattered on the deck. The refrigerator emptied, the air conditioning humming at full blast even though no one was there. Once, Dorian gave the keys to friends without telling me, leaving strangers to sprawl across the living room I had just paid to furnish. When I objected, he brushed it off. It's family property. Callista. Don't be so uptight. And yet, for years, I swallowed it. I convinced myself that maintaining the cabin was proof of my place in the family, that if I kept shouldering the responsibility, they would one day see me differently. But all I ever became was the quiet caretaker of something they felt entitled to claim. As I thought back on it, the brunch words still stung. Lucky we include you. I began to realize the cabin wasn't a tie binding us together. It was the clearest evidence of how invisible I had always been, and that truth was already hardening into resolve as the memory of their laughter replayed in my mind. When I returned to the table after a trip to the restroom, the air was already humming with laughter. Dorian looked me up and down with a grin that was anything but kind. God, Callista, he said, loud enough for the server clearing plates to hear. You look like you crawled out of a church donation bin. Didn't realize beige was back in style. The table erupted. My aunt coughed into her napkin as if she were stifling laughter. My mother didn't even lift her eyes from her mimosa, though the curl of her mouth betrayed her amusement. It was all too familiar one line from Dorian, a chorus of silence from the rest, and me, the easy target who never fought back. In the past, I would have felt heat rising in my face, a pressure in my throat as I fought not to let them see me cry. I would have replayed the words for days, trying to convince myself they hadn't meant them the way they sounded. But this time was different. The sting never came. What settled instead was something colder, quieter, a clarity so sharp it sliced through every old excuse I had made for them. I lifted my coffee and took a measured sip, keeping my eyes on the window beyond them, where sunlight spilled across the cobblestone street. Let them laugh. Let them believe they'd landed another blow. They didn't know that I had stopped playing the role they'd written for me. In that moment, I understood the truth with a finality I had never let myself admit before. I wasn't part of this family, not in the way they pretended. I was a convenience, a bank account, a body to fill the empty seat. Nothing more. I set my cup down, steady, unflinching, and offered a faint smile as though I hadn't heard a word. Inside, though, the decision was already forming. I would no longer be the nameless chair at their table. That night, I would begin undoing the ties they assumed I'd hold forever. By the time I made it back to Houston that evening, the sun had already sunk behind the skyline. I drove in silence. No music, no radio chatter, just the low hum of the tires against asphalt. My apartment was as orderly as always, everything in its place. Yet the moment I stepped inside, it felt different, emptier, like a waiting room for a decision I had already made. I set my bag down, filled the kettle, and brewed a cup of peppermint tea. The steam curled in the air as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop in front of me. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, then moved with certainty. The subject line of the email read, "Ready now." I addressed it to Jared Whitman, the attorney who had helped me back in 2009 when the lake house nearly slipped into foreclosure. We had talked before about selling it, but I had always backed out at the last minute, telling myself it wasn't the right time. That hesitation was gone. I typed a short, direct message, attached the scanned deed and expense records, and hit send. The moment the screen flashed a message sent, I felt something in my chest loosen. Next came the shared credit account, the one I had created years ago to make things simpler for the family. I logged in and scrolled through the list of authorized users. Marjorie, Dorian, Lucille. Each name was a reminder of years of silence when the bills came due and years of assumption that I would always cover them. The system asked with each removal, "Are you sure you want to revoke access?" Yes. Again. Yes. One more time. Yes. I deleted every automatic payment, closed every loophole, and with a final click, the account went dark. No more overdrafts disguised as oversights. No more cards maxed out in my name. I sipped the last of my tea, the taste faintly bitter, and closed the laptop. Midnight had slipped past, the city outside still buzzing with life. But inside, the quiet was absolute. For the first time in years, I felt the beginning of freedom, though I knew the silence wouldn't last once they discovered what I had done. It didn't take long. 3 days after I shut everything down, the first text arrived from Dorian. "Why isn't my card working?" 10 minutes later, I'm in Vegas. "Don't tell me you shut it down." The calls came in waves after that, ringing until my phone buzzed warm in my hand. I turned it face down on the table and let the screen go dark. By the afternoon, my mother chimed in with her usual blend of entitlement and panic. The power at my place got shut off. "Something must be wrong with the payment system. Can you take a look for me?" A string of messages followed, each more frantic than the last. I didn't answer. For years, I had been their fix-it person, the one they called when the lights went out. The flights needed booking, or a bill had slipped past its due date. But this time, the silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. By the weekend, Lucille sent a photo of the cabin porch, weeds growing wild, grass knee-high, the porch light dark. "What's going on?" "Callista," she wrote. My father, silent for years on financial matters, suddenly appeared in the group chat, asking why the insurance had lapsed and why the cabin had been flagged as high risk. I read every word, every accusation, every thinly veiled guilt trip. Then I muted the thread and set my phone aside. There was nothing left to say. They weren't shocked because they missed me. They were shocked because their safety net had vanished. The quiet inside my apartment deepened. Not peaceful exactly, but firm. For the first time. My silence wasn't avoidance, it was a choice. Each unanswered call, each ignored message, became its own reply, louder than any defense I could have offered. 2 weeks after the first message, their outrage blurred into background noise. A dull hum I no longer felt compelled to acknowledge. And as the weight of their dependence slid off my shoulders, I began to picture the next step returning to the cabin not as its caretaker, but to close the door on it for good. The drive to Caddo Lake was one I could trace in my sleep. Every bend in the road, every stretch of pine and cypress felt etched into my memory. But this time, there was no anticipation of a family gathering waiting on the other end. I was going alone, and for the first time, it felt right. The cabin stood the same as it always had: wooden porch, peeling paint, a swing that creaked in the breeze. Yet the silence around it was heavier, almost expectant. I stepped inside, flicking the switch out of habit. The bulb above the kitchen table flickered once before humming to life, though I knew soon even that would go dark. I walked slowly through each room, fingertips brushing the edges of tables I had refinished, walls I had painted, fixtures I had replaced when no one else lifted a hand. On the far wall, the gallery of family photographs remained my parents in younger days. Dorian and me as children, group shots taken on long-forgotten summers. I stood there for a long moment before reaching up and lifting them down one by one. Not rushed, not angry, just deliberate. I placed each frame into a wooden box I had brought with me, sealing the lid and writing across it in black marker family, what it used to be, not to erase the past, but to put it away where it could no longer weigh me down. That afternoon, I sat at the old desk near the window, where sunlight filtered through moss-draped trees, and opened my laptop. I pulled up Jared's email and typed 2 words. Go ahead. Attached were every document he needed to put the house on the market. When I pressed send, the air in the cabin felt different, as if the place itself understood its time had ended. I stood, gathered the box under my arm, and walked out without looking back, already knowing the next knock on my door would not be from silence, but confrontation. 2 evenings after my visit to the lake, there was a knock at my apartment door. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor, but the second knock was sharper, impatient. I peered through the peephole and saw Dorian, his hoodie pulled up, hair unkempt, a paper bag clutched in his hand. He looked nothing like the polished man he paraded online. I opened the door just wide enough to face him. You didn't have to do this, he started, voice low but charged. You've torn the whole family apart. Do you have any idea how selfish this looks? I didn't move from the threshold? Siblings don't treat each other like ATMs, I said, my tone steady. And families don't call someone selfish the moment she says no. His eyes flickered, searching for the sister who would fold, who would apologize to keep the peace. She wasn't there. After a few seconds of silence, I pushed the door closed. His footsteps faded down the hall, leaving only the quiet hum of the building behind. Days passed without contact, until another knock sounded on a Saturday morning. When I opened the door, it was Adrienne, Dorian's girlfriend. Her eyes were red, her voice uneven. She stepped inside and held out a folder bound with a rubber band. I found these in his desk drawer, she said. The deed, the tax receipts, the insurance, all in your name. He told me it was his, that he paid for everything. I believed him. I flipped through the pages and saw the proof of what I had always known. She swallowed hard. I left him. I can't stay with someone who builds lies this deep. I just wanted you to know the truth was never hidden. It was buried. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. You're not invisible, Callista. Don't ever let him convince you otherwise. When the door shut behind her, the silence that lingered wasn't heavy this time. It was confirmation. And with it, I knew the last tie to the house and to them was already breaking. The sale closed more quickly than I expected. Jared sent the confirmation email on a Tuesday morning, a single line stating the funds had cleared and the deed was officially transferred. I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, letting the reality settle. The cabin was no longer mine to carry. That afternoon, I opened my banking app and transferred $20,000 into my parents' joint account. It wasn't necessary. The documents proved every payment had been mine alone, but I wanted the record to be clean. I wanted no one to say I owed them anything. The money wasn't a gift. It was a seal. Proof that every tie between us had been balanced and closed. Within weeks, I left Houston behind. I bought a small house tucked in the hills north of Austin, just outside of Marble Falls. The property wasn't large, but it had wide windows that welcomed sunlight, a quiet porch that looked out on oaks and limestone ridges, and enough space for me to breathe without feeling watched. Unpacking was slow, deliberate. Each box I opened, each item I placed on a shelf felt like claiming a life I hadn't been allowed to live. There were no group chat messages buzzing, no phone calls asking for login information, no sudden emergencies dropped in my lap. Only stillness and the sound of my own rhythm filling the rooms. At night, I sat on the back porch and listened to the cicadas rise in chorus, their steady hum carrying through the trees. I felt no guilt, no shame, only a strange lightness that came from knowing I had cut the last thread. And yet, as the silence deepened, I began to wonder what would remain when all the noise was gone. The months passed quietly, each one slipping by with a gentleness I had never known before. The family group chat, once constant with demands and guilt-laced reminders, had gone still, No questions about bills, no requests for passwords, no perfunctory holiday invitations, just silence. The only one who crossed that silence was Ezra. My cousin. 16, lanky, still growing into himself, but steady in ways the adults in our family never managed to be. He'd ride his bike out to my house on weekends, sometimes with a bag of burgers, sometimes with nothing but his company. We didn't need to talk much. His presence was its own reassurance that not everyone in my bloodline had learned to take. One afternoon, I found a postcard slipped under my front door. The picture showed a lake at sunset, purple and orange light spreading across still water that looked too much like Caddo. On the back, written in careful handwriting, were 8 words. We should have done better. You deserved better. No signature. No clue. I stood by the window for a long time, turning it over in my hands. It didn't matter who had written it, my mother, my brother, or maybe someone who had simply watched from the sidelines. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was an acknowledgement, however small, that the truth had been seen. I didn't place the card on the mantel or pin it to the wall. Instead, I tucked it into a drawer with other keepsakes, reminders of lives I had outgrown. I didn't need it to move forward. My freedom had already arrived, not loud or dramatic, but in the steady quiet of days I could finally claim as mine. And in that silence, I chose myself.